the man who just became the supreme leader of Iran, the man who now controls the country the United States is actively at war with, was already on a U.S. Treasury sanctions list before this war even started. The U.S. government sanctioned him in 2019 for funding Hezbollah, Hamas, the Taliban, and Palestinian Islamic Jihad. That same man's wife was killed in the U.S.-Israeli strikes 9 days ago. His son was killed too. And now he sits at the absolute top of the Iranian government, in charge of its nuclear program, its military, and every decision about whether this war escalates or ends. But here is the thing that is going to genuinely shock you, and I promise I will get to this about 2/3 of the way through this video. While this man was spending decades preaching the ideology of resistance against Western capitalism and imperialism, a year-long Bloomberg investigation published just weeks before the war began revealed something extraordinary about his personal finances. Something that tells you almost everything you need to know about who Mojtaba Khamenei really is. That is coming. But first, you need to understand who this man is, where he came from, and why his rise to power may be the single most consequential development of this entire war for the future of the Middle East. Welcome to the channel. My name is not important. What is important is that by the end of this video, you are going to understand exactly who Iran's new supreme leader is, how he spent 30 years operating in the shadows of the most powerful man in Iran, what he did to Iranian protesters who dared demand their freedom, why the Washington Institute for Near East Policy has described him as potentially more dangerous on nuclear weapons than his own father, and what his rise means for this war, and for you. If you are not subscribed yet, please do it now. This is the story that directly shapes how this conflict unfolds, and we are tracking every development. Let us start from the beginning. Because to understand Mojtaba Khamenei, you first have to understand the world he was born into. He came into the world on September 8, 1969, in the northeastern Iranian city of Mashhad, a holy city and one of the most important religious centers in Shia Islam. His father at that time was a young cleric and revolutionary activist named Ali Khamenei, who in the late 1970s would become one of the central figures of the Islamic Revolution that overthrew the Shah of Iran in 1979. Mojtaba was 9 years old when the revolution happened. He grew up watching his father rise from a young radical into the president of the new Islamic Republic by 1981, and then into the supreme leader of Iran itself in 1989. Think about what that childhood looks like. You are not just the son of a powerful man. You are the son of a man who is, by the doctrine of the Islamic Republic, the direct representative of God on earth. Mojtaba was in his late teens when Iran was still grinding through the brutal 8-year war against Iraq that had begun in 1980. According to Wikipedia and Britannica's detailed biographies, in 1987, at age 17, he finished high school and immediately joined the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC. He served in the Habib Battalion and participated in actual combat operations during the final phase of the Iran-Iraq War, including Operation Dawn 10 and Operation Mashhad. He was on an actual battlefield at 17. He was not some pampered prince who stayed behind the walls. He came up through the military structure of the IRGC, the same institution that, as we will see, would eventually place him at the top of Iran. After the war, he pursued a religious education in the 1990s at the famous seminary in Qom, the Vatican of Shia Islam. His teachers included some of the most conservative and doctrinally hardline clerics in Iran. He became a teacher at the seminary himself. But here is the critical point that most people do not understand about Mojtaba Khamenei. He was not building his power through religious prestige or public preaching. He barely ever spoke publicly. According to Al Jazeera, most Iranians had never heard his voice, even while knowing for years that he was a star rising within the system. He operated almost entirely in the shadows, and that is precisely what made him so powerful. According to Wikipedia's detailed account, by at least 2008, though likely years before, Mojtaba had become the de facto deputy chief of staff to his father's office for political and security affairs. In plain language, he controlled who got access to the supreme leader of Iran. He decided what information his father saw, what meetings he took, and which officials were briefed on which decisions. A WikiLeaks cable from the United States Embassy in London, cited in Wikipedia, described him as ranked just under the formal chief of staff, with significant control over his father's daily operations. He was briefed by the IRGC's top military commanders. He was the gatekeeper. And that position gave him something even more valuable than a title. It gave him decades of relationships, favors, and leverage over every institution in Iran. And then came 2009. And this is where the story turns dark. In June of 2009, Iranian presidential elections produced a result that millions of Iranians refused to accept. The incumbent Mahmoud Ahmadinejad was declared the winner by an enormous and implausible margin. Peaceful protesters, millions of them, in what became known as the Green Movement, flooded the streets of Tehran and other cities demanding their votes be counted. The regime's response was brutal. The paramilitary Basiji militia attacked protesters. People were beaten, arrested, and killed. Journalists and bloggers were disappeared into detention. According to multiple reports cited in Al Jazeera, Wikipedia, and Britannica, Mojtaba Khamenei was believed to have taken direct control of the Basij during this crackdown. The Guardian reported at the time that Khamenei's son had effectively assumed leadership of the anti-protest militia. Reformist presidential candidate Mehdi Karoubi wrote an open letter directly accusing Mojtaba of conspiring to rig the election in Ahmadinejad's favor. The protests were eventually crushed. And during those demonstrations in Tehran, according to Wikipedia, Iranians who knew Mojtaba's ambitions chanted a slogan in the streets that translates in English to, "Mojtaba, may you die and not become the leader." That slogan was chanted in 2009. Those protesters were right to be afraid. He became the leader anyway. And here is the pattern interrupt that puts this into perspective for you. Consider the timeline carefully. In 2009, Mojtaba crushed a democratic protest movement. In 2022, according to Britannica, he was believed to have again coordinated the brutal security response to the Mahsa Amini protests, the largest protests Iran had seen since the 1979 revolution itself. In January 2026, according to reporting on the 2026 Iranian protests, Iranian security forces killed thousands of people during mass anti-government demonstrations. And in March 2026, this same man, the man Iranian protesters had been warning the world about for 17 years, became Iran's supreme leader. The history of Mojtaba Khamenei is not a history of someone who grew more moderate over time. It is a history of someone who has consistently, repeatedly, and methodically crushed any form of dissent whenever given the opportunity. But the path to supreme leader was not smooth, not even close. When his father Ali Khamenei was killed in the first wave of strikes on February 28, 2026, Iran entered a constitutional and political crisis almost immediately. The Iranian constitution requires that the supreme leader be a senior Shia Islamic scholar, specifically a mujtahid, capable of interpreting Islamic law at the highest level and ideally holding the rank of Grand Ayatollah. According to Wikipedia and Britannica, Mojtaba Khamenei is technically a Hojatul Islam, a rank that sits below Ayatollah. He is not a mujtahid. He lacks the formal theological credentials the Constitution demands. Even his own father had reportedly opposed the idea of appointing him as successor, according to reports cited in Wikipedia, partly because doing so would look like dynastic inheritance, essentially turning Iran's theocratic republic into a monarchy. Many clerics inside the Assembly of Experts, the 88-person body responsible for choosing the supreme leader, shared these concerns. According to Iran International, 8 members boycotted a meeting specifically because they objected to what they viewed as hereditary rule. Then the IRGC stepped in. According to Iran International, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps used direct pressure, in-person meetings and phone calls with Assembly of Experts members to push Mojtaba's candidacy forward. Think about what that means. The most powerful military institution in Iran was telling religious clerics who to vote for. And on March 8, 2026, according to Al Jazeera, AP News, and Reuters, the Assembly of Experts announced Mojtaba Khamenei as Iran's new supreme leader in what it called a decisive vote. Hours later, according to Al Jazeera, the IRGC issued a formal public statement pledging complete obedience to the new supreme leader. Iran's president Masoud Pezeshkian pledged unity. The military and police pledged allegiance. Donald Trump, who had told Axios just days earlier that Mojtaba was a, quote, lightweight, and that his selection would be unacceptable, saying the United States needed to be involved in choosing Iran's next leader, had been completely ignored. Iran had made its choice. And it was the choice that said most clearly, this regime is not looking for an exit. It is looking for continuity. Now here is the deeper truth that the news coverage has mostly glossed over, and this is the open loop I set up at the very beginning of this video. In January 2026, just weeks before this war began, Bloomberg published the results of a year-long investigative journalism project into Mojtaba Khamenei's personal finances. What they found was extraordinary. According to Bloomberg, Mojtaba Khamenei is linked through intermediaries and layered corporate entities to a significant offshore financial network. The portfolio, as Bloomberg reported, includes high-value luxury real estate in London, including properties on what is locally known as Billionaires Row, a street called the Bishop's Avenue, with one property purchased for around $33.7 million in 2014. At current exchange rates, that is well over $40 million. For a single house. The broader portfolio reportedly includes a villa in an elite area of Dubai, hotel ownership and management assets in Germany and other European countries, and interests in shipping and banking relationships across multiple jurisdictions. Bloomberg reported that the assets were generally not held in Khamenei's name. They were structured through intermediaries and shell companies specifically to conceal the connection. Total value of properties linked to the network exceeds $138 million, according to reporting cited by Iran International. You might be thinking, so he's corrupt. That's not surprising in a dictatorship. But here is what I want you to understand about why this is so much more significant than simple corruption. This is a man whose entire public identity, whose entire ideological purpose is built on resistance against the West, against capitalism, against American imperialism, against the global financial system. And for decades, while Iranian citizens were living under crushing international sanctions, while the Iranian rial was collapsing, while ordinary Iranians could not access basic medicines because of those very sanctions, Mojtaba Khamenei was allegedly parking tens of millions of dollars in luxury properties on one of London's most expensive streets. He was using the very financial system his regime publicly condemns to quietly protect and grow personal wealth. And now, this man, already sanctioned by the United States Treasury since 2019 for funding Hezbollah, Hamas, the Taliban, and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, according to the U.S. Treasury's own official press release, is the supreme leader of a country the United States is currently at war with. Let that contradiction sit with you for a moment. Now let us talk about the single most important question this raises for the future of this war: the nuclear weapons question. His father, Ali Khamenei, issued a religious fatwa, a binding Islamic legal ruling, declaring that nuclear weapons were haram, meaning forbidden under Islamic law. That fatwa was one of the diplomatic arguments Iran used for years to push back against accusations that it was building a bomb. Whatever you think of that argument, the fatwa was a stated limit on Iran's nuclear ambitions from the very top of the system. According to several American analysts cited in Wikipedia, the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, and other sources, Mojtaba Khamenei does not share his father's position on nuclear weapons. Multiple analysts have described him as a supporter of Iran pursuing a nuclear arsenal. The Washington Institute specifically wrote, and I am quoting their assessment, that Mojtaba may decide that Iran must move quickly to obtain nuclear weapons in order to forestall future U.S. and Israeli attacks. The Daily Telegraph reported that some analysts have concluded he is actually more dangerous than his father, more brutal than his father. The Times of Israel described his appointment as signaling, quote, defiance and revenge. His own father's fatwa is now in the hands of a man who analysts believe wants to overturn it, precisely because his country is being bombed right now, and a nuclear weapon would make it impossible to bomb again. Here is where this connects directly to you and to the war we are in right now. The entire stated justification for Operation Epic Fury, the reason Trump gave to the American people and the world for launching this war, was to prevent Iran from ever having a nuclear weapon. That was the core argument. And now, the man running Iran is someone who analysts believe may be more motivated to pursue exactly that weapon than any Iranian leader in history, because he has personally watched his father get killed. His wife was killed, his son was killed, and the United States and Israel did it. If you were him, what would you conclude? So where does this go? 3 realistic scenarios. The first scenario is that Mojtaba Khamenei's position is weaker than it appears. Newsweek published an analysis titled, "Why Iran's New Leader May Not Be So Supreme," arguing that his authority could end up being exercised in a more collective, securitized way, with the IRGC essentially co-governing with him. Under this scenario, hardliners in the military take effective control of decision-making, and Mojtaba becomes more of a figurehead than a true supreme leader in the mold of his father. This could actually make Iran slightly less likely to pursue a nuclear weapons sprint in the near term, because the IRGC's primary interest is institutional survival, not ideological martyr missions. This scenario is possible but uncertain. The second and more likely scenario is that Mojtaba consolidates power and governs from an even harder line than his father. According to a Nick Kristof analysis published on social media citing expert P. Nina Citrinowicz, if Mojtaba consolidates power, Iran may adopt more hardline positions than under his father, strengthen its conventional military capabilities, and potentially make a stronger push toward nuclear weapons capacity. Under this scenario, the war does not end in any clean way. Iran continues asymmetric resistance, continues pressuring neighboring states, and works quietly to rebuild and expand whatever nuclear infrastructure survived the strikes. This is the scenario most analysts currently see as most probable. The third scenario is the one nobody in Washington is comfortable saying out loud. Mojtaba Khamenei, ruling over a country under active bombardment, its military degraded and its economy already broken by years of sanctions, concludes that the only real guarantee against future strikes is a nuclear deterrent, and he moves aggressively to get one. According to the Washington Institute, this approach could either stabilize the regime or accelerate its fragmentation. But if he succeeds, even partially, the entire strategic rationale of this war collapses. The US struck Iran to prevent a nuclear Iran. If the result of those strikes is a more radicalized leadership that is more committed to nuclear weapons than ever, the war will have achieved the opposite of its stated goal. That is not a comfortable thought, but it is a serious analytical possibility that deserves to be spoken plainly. Here is what to watch for. Watch Mojtaba Khamenei's first public address as supreme leader, specifically whether he frames this war as a moment of catastrophe or as a moment of sacred resistance and martyrdom. The framing matters enormously because it signals whether he is looking for an off-ramp or doubling down. Watch whether he attempts to consolidate theological authority. If he starts fast-tracking his own promotion to higher clerical ranks, that tells you he is trying to legitimize his position and build a durable power base. Watch the IRGC. If the military continues to pledge loyalty publicly and enthusiastically, that is a sign the hardline coalition is solid. And watch for any quiet back-channel signals to Oman or Qatar, the countries that have previously served as intermediaries for US-Iran communications. If there is any movement in those channels, it would be the first signal that Mojtaba sees a negotiated exit as even theoretically possible. Let me bring this full circle. I told you at the start of this video about a Bloomberg investigation that revealed something extraordinary. Luxury properties on London's Billionaires' Row, villas in Dubai, hotels in Germany. Over $138 million in offshore assets quietly accumulated by a man who publicly preaches the destruction of Western capitalism, all while his people suffered under the very sanctions his own behavior helped justify. And now that man, sanctioned by the US Treasury, accused by his own country's reformists of rigging elections, believed by analysts to have personally orchestrated the brutal crackdown on peaceful Iranian protesters in 2009, is the supreme leader of Iran. Here is the single most important thing I want you to take from this video. The killing of Ali Khamenei on day one of Operation Epic Fury was meant to destabilize Iran's leadership, and in the very short term, it did. But the successor Iran chose is not a pragmatist looking for a deal. He is a man forged by decades in the security apparatus, personally damaged by this very war, with deep IRGC ties and with views on nuclear weapons that may be more aggressive than anything his father ever expressed. The stated goal of this war was to make Iran less dangerous. Whether the leadership change makes Iran more dangerous or less is the most important unanswered question in the world right now. Tell me in the comments what you think. Does Mojtaba Khamenei make you think this war gets resolved faster, or does his profile suggest we are headed into something much longer and more dangerous? Drop your read below. I want to hear it. If this video gave you something real to think about, subscribe and hit the bell. We're covering every development in this conflict as it unfolds, and the next video is going to answer a question that is becoming more urgent by the day. What is Russia actually doing in this war? What intelligence is it providing? And what does it want out of Iran's survival? That one is already in production. Stay informed, stay sharp. I will see you in the next one.